Everyone thought she would just take it on the chin, smile for the cameras, and wait her turn. They thought Caitlin Clark would be grateful just to be in the building. But it looks like the WNBA pushed their biggest star too far. And now the consequences are rolling in like a tidal wave. Reports are circulating that the Golden Girl of women's basketball has officially drawn a line in the sand, allegedly telling insiders she is done with Team USA. The wildest part? It wasn't just the players pushing her out. It sounds like the commissioner herself, Kathy Engelbert, might have unintentionally confirmed the toxic environment that led to this shocking decision. The narrative has shifted from waiting her turn to walking away. And if the rumors are true, the league is about to lose its most valuable asset on the international stage. What started as whispers in locker rooms has now erupted into a full-blown crisis that threatens to tear apart the very foundation of women's basketball in America. The cameras were rolling, the microphones were hot, and the commissioner's words hung in the air like a guillotine ready to drop. In that moment, something broke. Something that can never be repaired. The silence from Clark's camp since then has been deafening, speaking volumes about the betrayal that unfolded behind closed doors. But what happened next left the entire country in disbelief. It started with what many are calling the biggest roster mistake in sports history, a decision that set the tone for everything that followed. When the Team USA squad was announced for Paris, the one name generating all the buzz, the name that was selling out arenas and driving TV ratings through the roof, was nowhere to be found. The selection committee hid behind the excuse of experience, claiming Clark hadn't paid her dues yet, and that the team needed veteran chemistry to secure the gold. But let's be real, nobody bought that for a second. It felt personal. While the world was tuning in to see her logo threes and flashy assists, the powers that be decided to bench her for the entire summer before she even stepped on the court. It was a loud, undeniable message to the rookie. You might be famous, you might be rich, but you aren't one of us yet. But that snub was just the tip of the iceberg. If leaving her off the roster was a cold shoulder, what happened inside the league once the game started was a straight-up assault. From the moment the season tipped off, it was open season on Clark. We saw the blindside hip checks, specifically the infamous moment with Chanity Carter that sent Clark sprawling to the floor before the ball was even in play. We saw the hard shvees, the face guarding, and the constant physical targeting that went way beyond normal basketball competitiveness. But the real issue wasn't just the players doing it. It was a deafening silence from the top. The league office seemed to look the other way, almost as if they were okay with their rookie sensation getting hazed on national television. They refused to suspend players immediately. They hesitated to upgrade fouls to flagrants until the public outrage grew too loud to ignore, and they let the narrative spiral out of control. This lack of protection culminated in a moment that changed everything. Just when things seemed to be cooling down, Commissioner Kathy Engelbert stepped in and poured gasoline on the fire. In a recent interview on CNBC that can only be described as a PR nightmare, she tried to downplay the toxicity directed at Clark by comparing it to Magic Johnson and Larry Bird rivalry of the 80s. She sat there smiling and spoke about marketing valuation and how great this rivalry was for the business of the league. She completely failed to condemn the very real dark clouds of racism and vitriol that had been hanging over the fan base and the players. It was a massive blunder. By treating the hate and the physical targeting as just another business metric to be capitalized on, she essentially validated Clark's feelings of isolation. It sent a clear signal that the league cares more about the drama and the dollars and the safety and mental well-being of the player bringing in those dollars. What happens next changes everything for the league's future. To understand how we reach this breaking point, we need to pull back the curtain on the league establishment that has been quietly orchestrating Clark's downfall from the shadows. At the center of this web sits Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, a corporate titan who stepped into the sports world with a spreadsheet mentality, but no understanding of its soul. Engelbert, with her Wall Street pedigree and corporate polish, has always treated the WNBA more like a portfolio to be balanced and a community to be nurtured. Under her leadership, the league has become increasingly tone-deaf to the very athletes who make it special, prioritizing profits over people and controversy over character. The most damning evidence of this approach came in that fateful CNBC interview, where Engelbert's true colors were revealed for all to see. When asked about the vitriol directed at Clark, she didn't condemn it. She commodified it. Rivalries drive engagement, she purred, leaning into the camera with a practiced smile. What we're seeing is reminiscent of the Magic Bird era, and that's tremendously valuable for our brand. In that moment, she wasn't just speaking as a commissioner. She was speaking as a cold-hearted CEO who had just reduced a young woman's pain to a line item on a quarterly report. But Engelbert's arrogance is just one piece of this toxic puzzle. The real villainy lies in how the league office systematically enabled the physical targeting of Clark throughout the season. Time and again, we saw opponents take liberties that would have drawn immediate suspensions in any other era. The most egregious example came during that nationally televised game against Chicago, when Chindy Carter delivered a hip check that sent Clark crashing to the floor before the play had even begun. It was a blatant act of aggression, yet the league's response was tepid at best. Instead of an immediate suspension, they waited 3 days as public outrage mounted, finally issuing a mere fine that felt more like a slap on the wrist than a genuine deterrent. This pattern repeated itself throughout the season. Hard fouls went unreviewed. Flagrant fouls were downgraded. The message was clear. Clark was on her own. The league office had essentially placed a target on her back, and then looked the other way as opponents took aim. What makes this particularly insidious is the stark contrast with how the league has historically protected its star players. When Diana Taurasi or Sue Bird faced similar physical play in their primes, the league came down hard on offenders. But with Clark, there's been a noticeable reluctance to intervene, suggesting either incompetence or something more sinister at play. Perhaps most telling has been the league's handling of the verbal attacks on Clark. From Cheryl Swoops repeatedly questioning Clark's credentials to other analysts minimizing her achievements, the league has remained conspicuously silent. In any other professional sports organization, such public undermining of a star player by league-employed commentators would result in disciplinary action. Not here, not with Clark. The veteran's resistance to Clark's inclusion represents another dark chapter in this unfolding drama. For years, Team USA has operated like an exclusive country club, with membership determined more by relationships than merit. The old guard, Taurasi, Bird, Stewart, and their inner circle have treated the Olympic roster as their personal fiefdom, dictating who belongs and who doesn't. When it came time to select a pair's roster, they closed ranks around Clark, using the flimsy excuse of chemistry to justify what was clearly a personal decision. Caitlin is an incredible player, but Team USA chemistry is something special that takes years to build. One veteran anonymously told a reporter, parroting the party line that had been carefully crafted to exclude Clark. The irony, of course, is that this chemistry argument completely falls apart when you consider how Clark seamlessly integrated into the All-Star game, where she not only played alongside but dominated against many of those very same Team USA members. The truth is, this was never about chemistry. It was about control. The veterans saw Clark not just as a talented newcomer, but as a threat to their legacy and their carefully constructed narrative about what makes a great player. They couldn't stand that this rookie, this white Midwestern phenom, was capturing headlines and breaking records without paying her dues in their eyes. So they drew a line in the sand, and in doing so, revealed the ugly underbelly of professional sports. The gatekeeping, the jealousy, the fear of being overshadowed. What these veterans failed to recognize is that by trying to protect their legacy, they were actually tarnishing it. True champions don't exclude rising stars. They embrace them. They don't fear the future. They help shape it. But blinded by ego and entitlement, they couldn't see that their actions weren't preserving their greatness. They were exposing their insecurity. The league establishment, led by Engelbert, enabled this behavior at every turn. They allowed the veterans to set the agenda, never questioning whether their motives were pure. They stood by as the narrative shifted from legitimate basketball concerns to something more personal, more exclusionary. And now, they're all facing the consequences of their arrogance. The very system they built to maintain control is now crumbling before their eyes, all because they underestimated the one player who could change the game forever. But what they fail to realize is that by trying to contain Clark, they were only amplifying her power. By trying to dim her light, they were only making it shine brighter. And by trying to exclude her from their club, They were inadvertently creating something far more powerful than any Olympic gold medal, a movement. Long before the arenas sold out, before the jersey sales skyrocketed, before the media storm erupted, there was just a girl from Iowa with a basketball and a dream. Caitlin Clark wasn't born into privilege or handed opportunities on a silver platter. She was forged in the gyms of Des Moines, where her father Brent would wake up at 5 a.m. to take her to practice before school. Those early mornings, those freezing winter days, those countless hours of repetition, they weren't just about basketball. They were about building character, about learning that excellence demands sacrifice, about understanding that the path to greatness is paved with sweat and determination. What most people don't realize is that Clark's journey was never just about becoming a great basketball player. It was about challenging expectations from day one. As a young girl growing up in the heartland, she was told that girls shouldn't shoot three-pointers like the boys. They told her to play closer to the basket, to be more feminine in her approach. Instead of listening, she developed a range that would eventually make her the all-time leading scorer in NCAA Division I history, men's or women's. She didn't just break records. She shattered perceptions of what was possible. At Dowling Catholic High School, Clark became a local phenomenon, but it was her decision to stay close to home and play for the University of Iowa that revealed something deeper about her character. In an era where top recruits chased the bright lights of Connecticut, Notre Dame, or Tennessee, Clark chose to build her legacy in Iowa City. She wasn't chasing the spotlight. She was determined to create it. That decision spoke volumes about her values, loyalty, community, and the belief that greatness doesn't require changing who you are or where you come from. What followed at Iowa was nothing short of historic. Clark didn't just play basketball. She redefined it. Her deep three-pointers became her signature. But it was her court vision, those no-look passes that seemed to defy physics, that truly set her apart. She played with a joy that was infectious, a creativity that inspired, and competitive fire that burned brighter with each challenge. But what truly distinguished Clark wasn't just her statistics. It was how she handled adversity. In the 2023 NCAA championship game against LSU, she faced not just a formidable opponent, but a wave of criticism and racist vitriol from fans. Instead of letting it break her, she responded with grace and dignity. She never blamed the referees, never made excuses, never let the outside noise penetrate her focus. That poise under pressure will become her defining characteristic as she transitioned to professional ranks. When the Indiana Fever selected Clark with the first overall pick in the 2023 WNBA draft, expectations were sky high. What no one could have predicted was how quickly she would exceed them. Her rookie season wasn't just impressive. It was revolutionary. She broke single-season records for assist three-pointers and became the first rookie in WNBA history to record a triple-double. But what made her season truly remarkable was how she achieved these milestones while facing unprecedented physical targeting. Game after game, opponents tested her with physical play that went beyond basketball. The hard fouls, the aggressive shoves, the deliberate attempts to knock her off balance. Clark absorbed it all with a resilience that bordered on superhuman. What made this even more impressive was how she responded on the court. She never retaliated with dirty play. She never engaged in the theatrics that some players use to draw attention to themselves. Instead, she let her game do the talking. She got up after every hard foul, dusted herself off, and continued to play with the same joy and creativity that made her a star. Off the court, Clark's conduct was equally admirable. In press conferences, she never took the bait when reporters tried to bait her into criticizing opponents or officials. She spoke with maturity beyond her years, always finding a way to praise her teammates and focus on team goals. When asked about the physical play, she would simply say, "This is basketball. It's a physical game, and I'm just trying to be strong and help my team win." This professional conduct through adversity revealed something essential about Clark's character. She possesses an inner strength that cannot be shaken by external forces. She understands that true power isn't about responding to every slight or seeking revenge against those who wrong you. It's about staying true to yourself and your values, even when the world around you is chaotic. Perhaps the most telling moment came after a particularly physical game where Clark had taken multiple hard hits and still managed to lead her team to victory. A reporter asked if she felt the league was doing enough to protect her. Her response spoke volumes. "I'm not here to talk about protection. I'm here to play basketball. The refs do their job, and I do mine. My focus is on getting better every day and helping this team win." That answer, calm, composed, and forward-looking, encapsulates everything that makes Clark uniquely prepared for the power move she allegedly now considers. She doesn't react impulsively to injustice. She observes, she processes, and when the time is right, she acts with precision and purpose. Throughout her journey, Clark has demonstrated an ability to turn setbacks into comebacks, to transform criticism into motivation, to channel adversity into achievement. She didn't just survive the challenges thrown her way. She thrived in spite of them. This resilience isn't just about physical toughness. It's about emotional intelligence, about understanding that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. What the league establishment failed to recognize is that by trying to break Clark, they were actually forging her into something stronger. Each snub, each hard foul, each moment of disrespect didn't diminish her. It empowered her. It gave her clarity about who she is and what she stands for. It helped her realize that her value isn't determined by others' opinions or their willingness to include her. Her worth is inherent, undeniable, and now, more than ever, ready to be claimed on her own terms. As whispers of her departure from Team USA grow louder, those who have followed Clark's journey understand this isn't an impulsive decision born of anger or frustration. It's a calculated move from someone who has learned to play the long game, someone who recognizes that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to walk away from a table where you're not truly welcome. Clark's journey from Iowa prodigy to WNBA sensation has prepared her for this moment in ways that neither the league establishment nor the veteran players could ever comprehend. They saw a talented basketball player. What they failed to recognize was a strategic mind operating on a different level entirely. They thought they were dealing with a rookie who needed guidance. What they were actually facing was a visionary who was about to change the game entirely. The tension had been simmering beneath the surface for months, but it was that fateful CNBC interview that brought everything to a boiling point. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert sat across from the business network's anchor, perfectly coiffed and exuding corporate confidence, completely unaware that she was about to pour gasoline on a fire already raging out of control. When asked about the escalating tension surrounding Clark and the unprecedented vitriol directed at her from fans, and even some players, Engelbert leaned forward with a practiced smile and delivered what will undoubtedly go down as one of the most tone-deaf statements in sports history. "What we're seeing is reminiscent of the Magic Johnson-Larry Bird rivalry of the 80s, she explained, her voice smooth as silk. These intense matchups create engagement, drive viewership, and ultimately benefit everyone involved in the league. It's actually quite valuable from a business perspective." The camera zoomed in slightly as she continued, completely oblivious to the bombshell she was dropping. Rivalries are the lifeblood of sports. They create narratives that fans connect with emotionally. The Clark situation has generated unprecedented interest in the WNBA, which translates to better sponsorship deals, higher ratings, and more revenue that benefits all our players. In that moment, something shifted. The carefully constructed facade of concern for player welfare crumbled, revealing the cold, calculating business machinery operating beneath. Engelbert wasn't just acknowledging the controversy. She was celebrating it. She wasn't just failing to condemn the toxicity. She was monetizing it. What made her comment particularly egregious was a complete absence of any acknowledgement of the dark undercurrents surrounding Clark's treatment. There was no mention of the racist attacks on social media, no condemnation of the gender vitriol, no recognition of the targeted physical aggression that went beyond normal basketball competition. Instead, she reduced a young woman's pain and isolation to a business metric, a line item on a balance sheet. The backlash was immediate and ferocious. Social media exploded with outrage, with fans, commentators, and even casual observers expressing disbelief at the commissioner's insensitivity. Hashtags like #EngelbertMustGo and #ProtectClark trended nationwide. But what truly elevated this from a PR crisis to a full-blown institutional failure was the response from the WNBA Players Association. In a carefully worded but unmistakably critical statement released just hours after the interview aired, the union representing the league's athletes made their position crystal clear. The WNBA Players Association unequivocally rejects any comparison between the current situation involving Caitlin Clark and historic basketball rivalries. The racist, misogynistic, and threatening behavior directed at any of our players should never be framed as beneficial to our league. We stand in solidarity with all athletes who face discrimination and harassment, and we call on league leadership to take concrete steps to address these issues rather than exploiting them for publicity. The statement continued, growing more pointed with each paragraph. The comparison to Magic Bird is particularly troubling given that their rivalry, while intense, did not involve the same elements of identity-based hatred that we're seeing today. To suggest otherwise is not only historically inaccurate, but deeply disrespectful to players who have endured genuine abuse. This public rebuke from the Players Association was unprecedented in the WNBA's history. The union had always maintained a united front with league leadership, presenting a cohesive image to the public. But Engelbert's comments had created a fracture too wide to ignore. The division within the league's leadership was now plain for all to see. What made the situation even more telling was the contrast between Engelbert's defensive posture and Clark's continued composure. While the commissioner scrambled to do damage control, releasing clarifying statements, appearing on additional interviews, and attempting to walk back her comments, Clark remained characteristically silent. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't engage with the media frenzy. She didn't add fuel to the fire. Instead, she continued to show up for her team, to play with the same passion and professionalism that had defined her rookie season. This stark difference in their approaches revealed everything about their respective characters. Engelbert, faced with criticism, became defensive, doubling down on her position before reluctantly offering a half-hearted apology that felt more like a corporate communication strategy than a genuine expression of remorse. Clark, faced with adversity, maintained her dignity, refusing to be drawn into the drama or allow herself to be used as a pawn in someone else's narrative. The debate escalated further when prominent sports analysts began weighing in. Notable commentators from across the sports spectrum criticized Engelbert's handling of the situation, with many pointing out the fundamental flaw in her Magic Bird comparison. Magic and Bird competed fiercely on the court, but they never faced the kind of identity-based hatred that Clark is dealing with, explained one respected NBA analyst during a primetime segment. To equate healthy competition with targeted harassment is not just misguided, it's dangerous. It sends a message that this kind of behavior is acceptable as long as it generates ratings. As the controversy intensified, Engelbert's position became increasingly untenable. Her attempt to clarify her comments only seemed to dig the hole deeper. In a follow-up interview, she tried to explain that she was merely acknowledging the business impact of the controversy, not endorsing the toxic behavior. But by then, the damage was done. The perception had been cemented. The league leadership cared more about profits than people, more about ratings and respect. Throughout this escalating drama, Clark's silence spoke louder than any statement could have. Her refusal to engage, her commitment to letting her performance speak for itself, her unwavering focus on basketball rather than controversy, all of these choices demonstrated a level of emotional intelligence and strategic thinking that belied her years. While Engelbert flailed, Clark floated. While the commissioner grew more defensive, Clark remained composed. The contrast was not just striking, it was revelatory. It showed who truly understood the power dynamics at play, who recognized that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. As the debate reached its fever pitch, with calls for Engelbert's resignation growing louder and the league's reputation hanging by a thread, something shifted in the public consciousness. People began to see this not just as a sports controversy, but as a broader cultural moment, a reflection of how institutions often fail to protect those who don't conform to established norms, how systems of power resist change even when it's inevitable, and how courage sometimes looks like walking away rather than fighting back. The debate had escalated far beyond basketball. It had become a referendum on values, on principles, on what it means to lead with integrity versus what it means to manage with expediency. And in that referendum, Engelbert had clearly been found wanting. The world held its breath as rumors began circulating from sources close to Clark's inner circle. The whispers that had been growing louder for weeks finally crystallized into a decision that would send shockwaves to the basketball world. Caitlin Clark, the golden girl of women's basketball, had allegedly made the ultimate power move, informing Team USA officials that she would be withdrawing from consideration for future national team duties. This wasn't just a statement. It was a strategic masterstroke that would fundamentally alter the power dynamics in women's basketball for years to come. The news first broke through a carefully orchestrated leak to a trusted sports journalist, someone known for their integrity and connection to Clark camp. The timing was impeccable, just days after Engelbert's disastrous CNBC interview, when the league was already reeling from public backlash. The message was clear. Clark wasn't just a passive victim in this drama. She was a strategic player willing to leverage her unprecedented popularity to force systemic change. What made this decision so devastatingly brilliant was its timing and its implications. With the Los Angeles 2028 Olympics on the horizon, Team USA was banking on Clark being the face of their campaign, the homegrown superstar who would help sell out arenas and capture the imagination of casual sports fans. Her withdrawal wasn't just a personal decision. It was a financial catastrophe waiting to happen. The strategic implications of this move were staggering. By stepping away from Team USA, Clark wasn't just depriving herself of Olympic glory. She was depriving the organization of its most valuable marketing asset. The committee that had so arrogantly excluded her from the Paris roster, citing chemistry concerns and experience requirements, suddenly found themselves in an impossible position. They had gambled that Clark needed the Olympics more than the Olympics needed her. They were wrong. Dead wrong. The financial numbers told a story that even the most stubborn league executives couldn't ignore. Before Clark's arrival, the WNBA was struggling to turn a profit, with teams flying commercial and playing in front of half-empty arenas. Since she entered the league, attendance had skyrocketed by over 40% league-wide. TV ratings had tripled, with games featuring Clark drawing viewership numbers that rivaled established men's sports. Most importantly, the league had just signed a historic media rights deal worth over $2 billion, a deal that industry insiders attributed primarily to the Clark effect. The irony was suffocating. The veterans who had treated Clark like an outsider were all cashing the checks that her popularity wrote. The league office that had failed to protect her was benefiting from her star power. And now, by withdrawing from Team USA, Clark was effectively taking her ball and going home, leaving the national team to rely on the old guard who simply did not move the needle the same way. What made this counterattack particularly devastating was its quiet dignity. There was no press conference, no angry statement, no public tirade against the league or its leadership. Instead, there was just a simple, professional notification through proper channels, a decision made with the same composure that had defined Clark's response to every challenge she'd faced. This was an emotional outburst. It was a calculated business decision that demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that belied her years. As news of Clark's decision spread, the panic within league headquarters became palpable. Engelbert, who had so confidently compared the Clark situation to the Magic Bird rivalry just weeks earlier, suddenly found herself facing a crisis of her own making. The commissioner who had treated Clark's struggles as a marketing tool now had to confront the reality that she had lost control of the narrative entirely. Behind closed doors, emergency meetings were convened. Phone calls flew between league offices, team executives, and Olympic committee members. The realization dawned slowly but inevitably. They had severely underestimated the power they were dealing with. Clark wasn't just a talented basketball player. She was a cultural phenomenon who had single-handedly transformed the economic landscape of women's basketball. The financial implications of Clark's withdrawal were staggering. Marketing executives who had been planning LA 2028 campaigns around Clark's image suddenly found themselves back at the drawing board. Sponsors who had committed millions based on Clark's participation began reconsidering their investments. Television networks that had been planning broadcast schedules with Clark as the centerpiece were forced to recalculate their projections. The domino effect of this single decision threatened to undermine years of careful planning and investment. What made the situation particularly galling for the league establishment was how Clark had turned their own arguments against them. They had claimed she lacked experience, that she needed to pay her dues, that team chemistry was more important than individual talent. By withdrawing from Team USA, Clark had essentially said, "You're right. I don't need this. I don't need the validation of an Olympic gold medal to prove my worth. I don't need to be part of a system that doesn't value me." It was a power move of the highest order, one that left the league establishment with no good options. They couldn't force Clark to play. They couldn't criticize her decision without appearing petty and vindictive. They couldn't replace her with someone who generated even a fraction of the interest or revenue. They were, in essence, checkmated. The desperation within league offices became increasingly evident as the days passed. Anonymous sources began leaking stories to the media, attempting to frame Clark's decision as selfish or immature. But these attempts at character assassination backfired spectacularly, only reinforcing the narrative that the league establishment was fundamentally out of touch with both Clark and the new generation of fans she represented. What the league failed to understand was that Clark's decision resonated far beyond basketball. In an era when workers across industries were reevaluating their relationship with employers, when people were increasingly unwilling to tolerate toxic work environments, Clark's stand became a symbol of a broader cultural shift. Her decision to prioritize her well-being and professional integrity over institutional validation struck a chord with anyone who had ever felt undervalued or disrespected by a system that claimed to need them but failed to appreciate them. As the realization of Clark's leverage sank in, the league's approach shifted from defensive to conciliatory. Behind the scenes, frantic efforts were underway to open lines of communication with Clark's representatives. Offers were made, promises were whispered, and attempts at reconciliation were initiated. But the damage had been done. Clark had drawn a line in the sand, and there was no going back. The most brilliant aspect of Clark's counterattack was how it forced the league to confront its own hypocrisy. For years, the WNBA had marketed itself as a progressive organization that valued diversity, inclusion, and player empowerment. Yet their treatment of Clark had revealed a different reality, one where old guard gatekeeping, jealousy, and resistance to change still thrived. By withdrawing from Team USA, Clark had exposed this contradiction in the most public way possible, forcing the league to either live up to its stated values or face the consequences of their hypocrisy. The financial ultimatum hanging over the league became increasingly impossible to ignore. With the collective bargaining agreement up for renegotiation and players demanding higher salaries and better working conditions, the league needed the revenue growth that Clark brought to the table more than ever. But if Clark remained at odds with the league and the national program, that growth was not guaranteed. The other players needed to realize that biting the hand that fed them was a dangerous game. They wanted the private jets and million-dollar salaries that Clark's popularity had made possible, but they hadn't wanted a phenomenon that made it all possible. You can't have it both ways. As the full implications of Clark's decision became clear, the league's confidence crumbled completely. The commissioner who had so arrogantly dismissed concerns about Clark's treatment now found herself in an untenable position. The veterans who had so confidently excluded Clark from the Olympic roster suddenly faced a reality that they might never get another chance to play alongside the most famous female athlete on the planet. The establishment that had so stubbornly resisted change now had to confront the fact that change was coming whether they liked it or not. Clark's mic drop counterattack wasn't just about basketball or Olympic medals. It was about dignity, respect, and the fundamental right to be valued for who you are and what you bring to the table. It was a statement that transcended sports, speaking to anyone who had ever been told they weren't ready, didn't fit in, or needed to wait their turn. And in making that statement, Clark had not only secured her own power, but had potentially changed the game forever for those who would follow. The moment news broke of Clark's alleged decision to walk away from Team USA, social media erupted with the force of a digital tsunami. Within minutes, hashtag Clark Walks Away was trending nationwide, followed closely by hashtag WNBA in Crisis and hashtag Respect Clark. Twitter became a battlefield of opinions, with fans, analysts, and even casual observers weighing in on the controversy that had transcended sports and become a cultural flashpoint. Memes proliferated at lightning speed, each one more damning than the last. One particularly viral image showed Engelbert as a Titanic, with Clark represented by an iceberg looming in the distance. Another depicted Clark walking away from a burning building labeled WNBA Establishment with the caption, "Some fires aren't worth fighting." These weren't just clever graphics. They were visual indictments of a league that had failed its brightest star. What made the social media explosion particularly significant was its diversity. It wasn't just basketball fans weighing in. It was teachers, nurses, office workers, and students. People who had never watched a WNBA game before Clark's arrival, but now felt personally invested in her story. They saw in Clark's struggle a reflection of their own experiences with workplace politics, with gatekeeping, with systems that claimed to value innovation while simultaneously punishing those who dared to innovate differently. The ripple effect extended far beyond social media. Prominent commentators from across the sports spectrum dedicated entire segments to analyzing Clark's decision. Stephen A. Smith, known for his outspoken commentary, devoted 10 minutes of his ESPN show to what he called the most significant power move in women's sports history. He didn't just praise Clark. He condemned the league establishment with a passion that resonated with millions of viewers. "What we're witnessing here isn't just about basketball," Smith declared, his voice rising with emotion. "It's about dignity, respect, and the fundamental right to be valued for who you are and what you bring to the table." Caitlin Clark didn't just withdraw from Team USA. She sent a message to every person who has ever been told they're not ready, don't fit in, or need to wait their turn. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is to walk away from a table where you're not truly welcome. The celebrity reaction was equally telling. A-list actors, musicians, and business leaders publicly voiced their support for Clark, many sharing their own experiences with institutional resistance to change. Serena Williams, no stranger to challenging tennis establishment norms, posted a powerful message on Instagram. They didn't just underestimate Caitlin's talent. They underestimated her power. They thought they were dealing with a player who needed their validation. What they failed to realize is that she was building her own table all along. What made this support particularly significant was its diversity. Celebrities from different backgrounds, industries, and political perspectives found common ground in their admiration for Clark's stand. It wasn't just about sports anymore. It was about a broader cultural moment, a recognition that the old ways of doing business, the old hierarchies, the old gatekeeping mechanisms were being challenged across every sector of society. Perhaps most revealing was the civil war that erupted within the WNBA fan base. On one side stood the OG fans, those who had supported the league through its lean years, who prided themselves on their deep knowledge of the game and its history. Many in this camp viewed Clark with suspicion, seeing her as an interloper who hadn't paid her dues, who brought unwanted attention to their niche sport, who threatened the carefully constructed culture they had helped build. On the other side were Clark's new supporters, millions of fans drawn to the league by her electrifying style of play and compelling personal story. These fans saw in Clark not just a talented athlete, but a symbol of change, someone who was forcing the world to pay attention to women's basketball in ways that hadn't happened before. The clash between these groups played out in comment sections, on talk radio, and in sports bars across the country. OG fans accused Clark supporters of being bandwagon jumpers who didn't understand the nuances of the game. Clark supporters fired back, accusing the old guard of jealousy and resistance to change. What both sides failed to recognize was that their conflict was exactly what the league establishment wanted: a distraction from their own failures, a way to avoid accountability by pitting fans against each other. Amidst this cacophony of voices, one silence spoke louder than any statement: the silence from Clark's camp. In an era where athletes carefully manage their public image through social media and press releases, Clark's refusal to engage was remarkable. There was no tweet confirming her decision, no Instagram post explaining her reasoning, no carefully crafted statement from her agent. There was just silence, a void that allowed others to project their own interpretations, their own agendas, their own narratives onto her story. This silence wasn't accidental. It was strategic. It demonstrated a level of emotional intelligence and media savvy that belied Clark's years. By refusing to engage, she maintained control of the narrative, forcing everyone else to react to her rather than the other way around. She had made her move, and now she was letting the consequences unfold without interference or explanation. What made this silence particularly telling was how it contrasted with the league's frantic response. While Engelbert and other league officials scrambled to do damage control, issuing statements and giving interviews, Clark remained above the fray. This stark difference in their approaches revealed everything about their respective positions of power. The league was reacting, Clark was acting. The league was defensive, Clark was composed. The league was trying to control the narrative. Clark had already written the ending. As the days passed and the shockwaves continued to reverberate throughout the sports world, a new understanding began to emerge. Clark's decision wasn't just about Team USA or the Olympics. It wasn't just about personal slights or professional disrespect. It was about something much bigger, a fundamental shift in how athletes, particularly women athletes, understood their own power and their relationship to the institutions that employed them. The silence from Clark's camp wasn't just a refusal to comment. It was a statement in itself, a declaration that she didn't need to explain herself, that her actions spoke for themselves, that she was no longer seeking validation from a system that had failed to value her. In that silence, there was power. In that refusal to engage, there was dignity. And in that quiet confidence, there was the promise of something new, a future where athletes wouldn't just play the game but would help shape it, where they wouldn't just follow the rules but would help rewrite them. The aftermath shockwaves had just begun, and already, the landscape of women's sports was changing in ways that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. In the quiet moments that followed the storm of controversy, Caitlin Clark finally broke her silence, not with press conference or a tell-all interview, but with a simple, handwritten letter posted on her social media accounts. The letter wasn't angry or vindictive. It wasn't a detailed account of every slight she had endured. Instead, it was something far more powerful, a reflection on dignity, self-respect, and the universal truth that sometimes walking away is the strongest statement you can make. "Basketball has given me everything," Clark wrote, her words measured but resonant. "It has taught me about teamwork, about perseverance, about pushing past limits I once thought were unbreakable. But what I've learned most recently is that the game itself is bigger than any institution, any jersey, any gold medal. The true measure of success isn't the trophies you collect or the accolades you receive. It's the integrity with which you play and the respect with which you treat yourself and others." What made this statement particularly poignant was a tragic element underlying it. The painful reality of being rejected by the very idols Clark had once admired. In old interviews from her high school days, Clark had spoken reverently about players like Diana Taurasi and Sue Bird, about how she studied their moves, emulated their work ethic, dreamed of one day joining them on the Olympic stage. These weren't just basketball heroes to her. They were trailblazers who had paved the way for her and countless others. To have those very figures become the architects of her exclusion, to watch them close ranks against her, represented not just a professional disappointment, but profound personal betrayal. It was a loss of innocence that comes with realizing that those we put on pedestals are, after all, human, flawed, jealous, and sometimes threatened by the very success they inspired in others. "I've always believed that sports should bring out the best in us," Clark continued in her letter, her words carrying the weight of this painful realization. "They should teach us to lift each other up, to celebrate excellence wherever we find it, to recognize that we rise by lifting others." When that stops being true, when the game becomes more about protecting territory than pursuing greatness, more about maintaining hierarchies and creating opportunity, we have to ask ourselves what we're really fighting for. This reflection struck a chord far beyond the basketball world. It spoke to anyone who had ever been disappointed by mentors they once admired, who had ever discovered that the institutions they revered weren't worthy of their devotion, who had ever had to choose between compromising their values or standing alone. Clark's decision wasn't just about basketball. It was about the universal struggle to maintain one's integrity in systems that demand conformity. The inspiring crescendo of her message came as she addressed the young athletes who looked up to her, the next generation of dreamers who might face similar choices in their own journeys. To every young person out there who has ever been told they're not ready, don't fit in, or need to wait their turn, remember that your value isn't determined by others' opinions or their willingness to include you. It's inherent, undeniable, and yours alone to claim. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to create your own table rather than fighting for a seat at one where you're not truly welcome. Sometimes the greatest act of leadership is knowing when to walk away. This wasn't just advice. It was a revolutionary reimagining of power dynamics in sports and beyond. Clark was challenging the traditional narrative that athletes should be grateful for any opportunity, that they should endure any indignity for the chance to participate, that the system always knows best. Instead, she was proposing a new paradigm, one where athletes recognize their own worth, where they understand that they bring value to the table rather than just receiving it, where they see themselves as partners in the enterprise rather than mere participants. The values-driven reflection that concluded her letter transformed a personal controversy into a universal lesson about dignity, respect, and the courage to stand up for oneself. "I will always love basketball," Clark wrote, her words carrying the emotional weight of someone who had made a difficult but necessary choice. "I will always be grateful for the opportunities it has given me and the people it has brought into my life. But I love myself more, and I love the game too much to allow it to be diminished by those who would rather protect their legacy than embrace its future. My journey isn't over. It's just taking a different path. And I walk that path with my head held high, knowing that sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning the game, but honoring yourself and how you play it." In these words, there was no bitterness, no anger, no desire for revenge. There was only the quiet confidence of someone who had faced a difficult choice and made it with clarity and conviction. There was the wisdom of someone who understood that true power doesn't come from external validation, but from internal certainty. There was the grace of someone who could turn personal disappointment into universal inspiration. As the letter circulated across social media, its impact reverberated far beyond sports. Parents share it with their children, coaches with their teams, business leaders with their employees. It became a touchstone for conversations about integrity, self-respect, and the courage to walk away from situations that diminish rather than elevate us. What made Clark's message particularly powerful was its accessibility. She wasn't speaking as an untouchable celebrity, but as someone who had faced a universal human experience. The disappointment of realizing that something you once idealized wasn't worthy of your devotion. Her response to that experience wasn't bitterness or cynicism, but a deeper understanding of what truly matters. Not the approval of others, but the integrity of self. Not the validation of institutions, but the certainty of your own worth. In the end, Clark's resolution wasn't just about her relationship with Team USA or the WNBA. It was about a fundamental truth that transcends sports, careers, and public personas. That dignity matters more than hate. That self-respect matters more than system approval. That sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to refuse to participate in your own diminishment. It was a lesson not just for athletes, but for anyone who has ever struggled to maintain their integrity in systems that demand conformity, anyone who has ever had to choose between compromising their values or standing alone. And in that lesson, there was inspiration, not just to admire Clark's courage, but to find our own. And so we return to where we began, the commissioner's confirmation that changed everything. In her disastrous CNBC interview, Kathy Engelbert didn't just misspeak. She inadvertently validated every criticism Clark had faced, every doubt she had harbored, every reason she had for walking away. By treating Clark's struggles as a marketing tool rather than a human concern, Engelbert exposed the league's moral bankruptcy and confirmed what many had suspected all along, that the establishment cared more about profits than people, more about controversy than character. The WNBA didn't just lose a player. They lost their moral compass, their biggest star, and their connection to the very future they claimed to be building. This wasn't just a misstep. It was a self-inflicted wound that will haunt the league for years to come. But as one door closes, another opens. Clark's decision isn't just an ending. It's a beginning. The start of a movement where athletes reclaim their power, where dignity triumphs over disrespect, where integrity matters more than institutional approval. This is more than just basketball drama. It's a cultural moment that reflects broader struggles for recognition, respect, and the right to define one's own worth. If you've been inspired by Clark's courage, if you believe in standing up for yourself and others, if you want to be part of the conversation about the future of women's sports and beyond, subscribe to our channel and share this story. Together, we can ensure that moments like this don't just fade away, but spark meaningful change. The question now isn't just whether Clark made the right decision, but what her courage inspires in all of us. When faced with systems that diminish rather than elevate us, will we choose comfort over conviction, or will we find the strength to walk our own path? The answer will determine not just the future of women's basketball, but the future of how we all navigate the spaces between who we are and who others want us to be.